the Spirit World Gallery, the key to the Lenormand definition by you, which is it was quite surprising to me. I mean, you're always surprising me with these things, you know. It's like, ooh, another thing by Robin Artisson, and this one was actually not paid. It was just, you know, hey, go ahead and download the PDF. Why did you do this? When you could have another book out.
Well, I'm a huge fan of the normal system because I love the cards. I think that they're very mysterious, and just the simplicity of them.
Yeah.
One of the things I learned early on was that simplicity has an enormous amount of power. When things get too complicated, they get too cognitively heavy. It's just a sign that you're going in the wrong direction, and it's always been that way with me. When I attempted to frame my occult understandings of the world or of the unseen world in too complicated a terms, it just kind of fell apart on me eventually.
Mm-hmm.
Because I think ultimately the soul and the body and this world and our relationships, this might seem complex, but there's a beautiful simplicity to everything. And so simplicity is a big deal to me. Mm-hmm. But I've always liked the Lenormand system, and I recently was talking to some people online, and they were more than one person, and they were talking about divination, which I have it's a very important part of my daily life and my practice. Mm-hmm. And I just realized that for years I'd been using this incredible little technique that I discuss at length in that online work I just did, and I just wanted to get it out there to people because I knew they could all really benefit from it. Before I did this, I was privately sending an essay I wrote on tarot divination to people. And that's obviously not public, but people would write to me and they'd have really important issues, and I realized all these people need is this. They're already tarot readers, but if they just had this essay I'd written, it's kind of an offline private thing. Yes. They could really benefit from it. They could get the advice that they're looking for. And that's really what these divination devices are all about, accessing special guidance.
Ladies and gentlemen, we're talking with Robin Artisson on the second part of the Letters from the Devil's Forest. And this is a book that is the latest book of Robin Artisson. And we're talking about something that you put out a couple of, I don't even know when it was, but it was like a couple of hours ago, maybe. Right? And it was, it's on your website, actually, www.robinartisson.com, and it's on Spirit World Gallery, and it's the key to the Lenormand divination by Robin Artisson, and you can actually download it, and it's a PDF file. You can download it and have all of the good information about this definition system. So, and that's what I was like, wow, again, a wonderful surprise from you. I have said this before, and I think that when we talked on the part one. About some of your texts on this book are very autobiographical. One of them that I really think that it's just very much so is the Crooked Road, the Crooked Road, and you talk about it, and you say when I began. You say it seemed a certain way. I was chasing something, all right, but I didn't quite know what. It's very interesting because this is like a question that I came up with a lot of people. How the hell did this guy actually start it? Did you have teachers? I think that I did. I made this question a long time ago on our first interview, but I would love to, taking a little bit of on the cue of this particular text. How did you begin?
Well, I do talk, like you said, it is kind of autobiographical, I suppose. I think everything begins sort of underground. I mean, you plant seeds, and there's an enormous amount of activity going on below the surface before anyone becomes conscious of the fact that there's changes happening. And, seeds are really undergoing a lot of metamorphosis underground before they put their first leaves and, before they appear above the soil. So I guess, when I become conscious of all of this happening, I'm still a kid, I'm in South Louisiana. I was just a kid. And I guess I was, for some reason, when I was in kindergarten, they did a play, and I was one of the kindergartners picked to be one of the punctuation marks in the play.
Yeah.
So, some of the kids were letters, some of them were punctuation marks, and I believe I was told that, I have no memory of this, but I was told that I was the question mark. And I don't know, I kind of laughed at that when I was told, but there's this irritating urge in me to ask a lot of questions about things, and it apparently has always been with me. I went to a Catholic school from kindergarten to 8th grade, and this is in the very deep South and very traditional Catholic school.
Of course.
And they were good people. That there was no surprise. I mean, they didn't sit around really, tormenting us too much with, be good in class, or you might go to hell or anything like that. They weren't like that. They did a lot of what they did, what the Catholic Church told them, including praying, the Angelus and things like that, all during certain times of the day. Just because it was tradition, it wasn't really a very conscious thing. They didn't talk about it a lot, but they did make some claims, which even as a kid troubled me. Sort of this idea that human history is very long, and there's been a lot of people out there and many civilizations, but thank goodness, that we got born right now, because, unlike everybody else in history, we have the right religion. It took a long time, but that whole right religion thing finally caught up with us, and here we are. And claims like that always bother me. I mean, I must have been 9 years old thinking, there's something rotten about this.
Yes.
So why in the world?
Yes.
Why in the world did it take, the unseen world, or the gods, or whatever, or God, or whomever? Why did it take all this time before they just decided to kick the truth about religion over to a few humans? And now, that all seemed very made up to me, very contrived. And I read books that I kind of wasn't supposed to read. I talked about some of my mother's occult, book collection. But
yes,
there were some. It's a Catholic school, so the library had some surprising titles in it, even books that the kids had access to. So this whole questioning thing has always been a part of me. By the time I was in high school, I had actively no longer considered myself Catholic. I realized that it just wasn't for me. And I went down to the library one day from my house, and there were some encyclopedias at the library. And this was back, when you actually went into a building and read books. There was,
yeah.
Internet, that was completely undreamed of.
Yes.
And there was an encyclopedia set called Man, Myth, and Magic. And I was just flipping through it. It was interesting. But there was a chapter in one of those encyclopedias on paganism. And I was like, well, okay, I know what pagans are, but this book was basically saying, there's a lot of people today who consider themselves pagan. And one of the things that encyclopedia said was that a lot of them believed that there was a goddess who literally birthed all things into existence. And that struck me. That really, really struck me deeply, because that made such a radical amount of sense to me, that creation, or the world, or everything came into being through an organic process like birth.
Mm-hmm.
Because being raised Catholic, God He makes things like a potter makes a pot.
Yeah.
It's a very, very different idea to think of the world being born as opposed to being shaped.
Did you had that kind of thing, like, why didn't I think this before? This makes perfect sense, right? Why?
Right,
wow.
Well, that just made so much sense to me. I think from that day, that was, I definitively was, in some strange sense, a modern pagan person,
Yeah.
But by high school, I had met another guy from my hometown. It's just completely, this is totally fate. He had a copy of Paul Huson's book, Mastering Witchcraft, and he and I both got a copy of it. And he and I's, back and forth activities really, I think, laid the groundwork. By the time I was in college, I was, making some of the more important contacts that I would make. A gentleman from the Isle of Wight became a correspondent of mine. He claimed to be a traditional witch of some sort.
Mm-hmm.
To this day, I've not been able to relocate him or really, I think, not verify. I'm not trying to verify anything, but what he gave me, one of the things that he gave me was this technique that I wrote about in The Witching Way of the Hollow Hill, called the Widder-Shin's Walk. It's a trance induction technique.
Yes.
From that point, and from a few of the other influences that I absorbed from people that I met or talked to, I was able to create the ability with trance, with extraordinary cognition, which 20 years later here, I've managed to bring up to a very a pretty intense level. But that's this allowed me to gain extraordinary contacts, relationships, conscious relationships with spirit persons, which stand behind this craft that I'm talking about or that I'm practicing.
What about teachers? This is one of the questions that I get a lot also, is that did he had any teachers?
When we talked last time, I had mentioned that there was a young lady who was a member of the majestic Wicca tradition. Remember her?
Yes.
She was sort of an unofficial, teacher. I don't really consider her a teacher because she was such a close friend. And teacher to me sort of implies maybe sort of a formal kind of relationship.
Yes.
But I did absorb an enormous amount from her. And the most important thing that I got from her wasn't things that she would write on paper. It was experiences. Now, I don't know anything else about the majestic Wicca tradition except that she claimed to be a part of it. But I do know one thing about her. She was able, and this is me, I'm not exaggerating at all, talk about waking a person up. I don't know how she did it. I don't know what kind of abilities she might have had. She could move her body's power so tangibly that you could physically, tangibly feel it. And I don't mean in the sense that if I walk over to you and I kind of tap your face with my hand, technically you're feeling my tangible power. No, she could project something subtle. I don't know what she did. I'll never forget the first day it happened. She reached out for my forehead, and it felt like there was cold or maybe warm sand being poured over my face and cascading down my body. The first time I'd ever experienced something that was, without a doubt, far outside of the range of ordinary experience. She could do that. She had the silliest names for some of these things, but the phenomenon was real. Now, as far as teachers are concerned, I consider my greatest teacher to be Dr. Peter Kingsley. So that's a very formal relationship of teacher to student. I've spoken with him and attended one of the seminars, and I have his books. But I think that I absorbed, as far as really shaping me is concerned, he's had an enormous amount of influence on me.
You say in another part of your book, there's a text called "A World Full of Gods." And you say that the capacity of the mind to create harmful and hateful associations might be just be the death of us. What is wrong with the word? And then you go on talking about the word God and the concept and idea of God. What is wrong with this?
Well, the term God by itself, for us today in the Western world, comes loaded with almost 2,000 years worth of baggage.
Yeah.
And there's just no way to spare this word from all of those associations. I mean, if I were to tell anybody, someone who just did not know me, and I just said, hey, I believe in God, if I said that on the streets, immediately the person I'm talking to has a very high likelihood of thinking, oh no, here's one of those, here's a guy that probably doesn't like gays very much, or here's a guy that's, there's all these associations. I'm immediately thought of as a social conservative. There is this idea that I think that unless you think like me, your soul is in danger. God just comes with all these ages of spiritual absolutism and a lot of other negative features, when in reality, the word itself, most anciently, simply refers to a being, an honored guest, or a being that is invoked to be present. That's all. A being that is called or invoked. So anything, or anyone, should I say, can be a god, the god of an occasion, what have you. But yeah, just the word God, it's dangerous. I mean, it really is. An awful lot of people have died because other people thought that their understanding of God was paramount.
Mm-hmm. And the other thing is also religion. When the word religion comes to, people think, well, religion would be, either Catholic or Christian or there's a couple of them. The what they call it, the official or the most followed. None other are valid or considered to be religions. Oh, that's not a religion. That's just a phase. The other thing that I want to ask you is one of the questions that I have from another text on your book, and let me just say this book is really quite remarkable. you can I do give the advice of all of our listeners to just grab this book, go to a desert island, and stay there until you finish the 702 pages of it. In a retire to or Maine or New Hampshire, in the middle of the woods, that would be even better. You just talk about the Lord of the Fairy Elfame, and it's very interesting because you said the first paragraph here is, for the longest time I felt that there was a very important difference between the Master of Witches, the Witch Father, the chief figure of witchcraft from any era in the northeastern, western, and northern Europe traditions, and the Great Father, or the darker, the more primordial Father Force that I thought was his sire. I consider them to be very distinct beings. What is the difference, and who are they?
Well, years ago, I would say you would not be wrong if you said, Robin, you don't seem quite as paganish as you used to be. And that's there would be some truth to that statement. I was years ago, I was extremely involved in modern Reconstructionist pagan type endeavors and movements, and it was a very profound and spiritual and important time to me. I enjoyed every second of it, and obviously, I'm a polytheist. I admit so in Letters from the Devil's Forest. I believe I believe there's a multiplicity of divine persons out there. I mean, spiritual persons that we can absolutely consider divine, and who were considered divine by people before us. So I mean, I that makes me a polytheist, whether I like it or not, and I do like it. But I think that my original thinking, when I started having extraordinary experiences, my original thinking, my bias was towards a very pagan sort of logic. It took me a while before I was able to sort of just let things be what they were. When things appeared, when I had experiences, when I had visionary experiences, I stopped trying to make them fit into some kind of system of categories that I had created or that I had adopted from some very traditional pantheonic kind of thinking, and just let these things take me where they were going to take me. Let the beings that I met, announce themselves to me for who they were, what they wanted to be, whatever, So when it comes to the Master, the Witch Father, you're talking about an extremely old and powerful and complex phenomenon, entity. Okay, it's very difficult, such a powerful shapeshifter who's had so many names, whose presence is ubiquitous in human history, ubiquitous in the world right now as we speak. It's very, very hard to try to fit him into anybody's story. Okay, he just kind of has to be left alone eventually to be who and what he is. And so that's sort of why I moved away from trying to fit him into some kind of pagan-sounding family of spirits. And that's what that chapter of the book is coming from. I do think that he was worshipped as a god by a lot of pagan people all over the world. I believe that he is still worshipped by a lot of people all over the world. But I think that in some way, since I considered him to be the indwelling presence of the actual wind of this world, or the physical, tangible experience we have of the wind and the atmosphere and essentially the surrounding, the enveloping atmosphere of the world, I consider this to be like his body. And, a lot of ancient people, I mean, almost all of them kind of have this fatherly notion about the sky or about the winds or about the weather kind of phenomenon. A lot like Zeus, you get a lot of the gods and who are associated with these things, especially very fatherly type gods. So at this point, I believe that very much that, when the early Christian church when Christian missionaries came into Greece and Rome, one of the interesting things they say about Zeus, a lot of missionaries kind of considered Zeus to be the out-and-out devil. I never understood that. I'm like, what are you talking about? Zeus, he strikes me as looking and sounding a lot like the Christian God, but now I understand, why a lot of Zeus's cult and his followers and the idea why he was given an almost satanic appearance by the church. Because Zeus, too, in a sense, in my understanding, is like an indweller inside of the phenomenon of weather and wind and sky.
Yes. Yeah.
So, I mean, I think the Master in very primordial societies was seen in that fatherly way. I mean, I really, really do.
Now, the other thing that well, let me just say this to you. I had a play also when I was in I don't know if it was prep school, but I actually played. You played the question mark, you said?
I did.
Yeah, I played the devil. Uh, I did. I did. And I would jump and say, I'm the devil. That was my first incursion in theater.
Awesome.
It says a lot about what I am. Okay, so the other really incredible text here, and I had to pick some. I couldn't, we would be here
Yeah, I
for
got.
part number 55. Ekate's Darling Crew. I just love this title. Let me just say that. And you say traditional witchcraft compared to modern pagan witchcraft. Which is it's a very interesting text. What is I'm sure that you changed this difference, or all over the years that you have been practicing this, and you find probably still finding differences and maybe similarities. But what is the difference between traditional witchcraft and modern pagan witchcraft? This was the motto, because you begin with Hecate and how Hecate was one of those entities that made it to the 21st century. Pagan, worshipping, and the goddess of witchcraft, etc. She's so much more than that. But what is the difference between traditional witchcraft and modern pagan witchcraft, in your opinion?
Just that, in my opinion, traditional witchcraft is is a continuation of patterns of sorcery, of witchcraft, that were prevalent in the pre-modern period, and before the Industrial Revolution. And if you look at the, and again, we come right back to Wilby's book, The Visions of Isabel Gowdy, where that book is a super catalog describing essentially pre-modern witchcraft. And it's pre-modern witchcraft was oriented around certain themes that we don't see a lot in modern witchcraft. Like, for instance, I can think of two that stand at the top of the list: death divination and death aversion, or death transference. Witches. And Wilby talks about this in Scotland, but she goes and she bridges the gaps and talks about it in other parts of Europe too. This was considered a very dark practice, but witches very commonly in those periods could save the life of a person who was dying by having someone or some other being die in their place. Mm-hmm. They could make a cow die or make a neighbor die instead of that person dying. Okay, they call this death transference, is what anthropologists call it. But as you can imagine, this was a very scary and dark-seeming activity to the people of the time, and more than a few witches, were executed for either doing it or being accused of doing it. But also death divination, which Isabel Gowdy herself and her covenant, which is what they were engaged in doing. They would go into trance states, leave the perceptual reality of their bodies behind, become changed into almost like fairy beings themselves, and they would join the wild hunt. They would join the master and the raiding fairies who flew through the sky and literally shot and killed people. This hunt was hunting for people whose time had come to die. And by participating in the hunt, Isabel could see which members of her community were going to be the next to die. Mm-hmm. And, and now, of course, she was forced to participate. Spiritual compulsion was a feature of pre-modern witchcraft. Once a witch bound themselves to these forces in the unseen world, when it was time for that witch to participate in the otherworldly reality, they didn't have a choice. And she was forced into this hunt, and she lifted up her own hands and used these fairy bolts, these elf bolts, these arrows, which are symbols of the unseen world's predatory relationship to our world. And she would shoot people or throw these things at people and kill them in the spirit world, and then later they would die in our world. But she was being forced to shoot these people, to throw them, and that's just something that the church at the time didn't understand. They just they heard her say, I went up into the fairy host and I shot this person, and like a week later she was dead. They thought of her as kind of a murderer, but the reality is she was more like a Valkyrie, more like a chooser of the slain, but fate was compelling her. These fateful forces were compelling her, kind of revealing to her who was going to die. Mm-hmm. And in a lot of primal societies, death divination, and it's still done in some places, and right now, this is considered a great service to the community, because it's good to know, that if your time is coming, so you can get your order, get your affairs in order, and things like that.
Yeah.
But those two phenomenon right there are features of pre-modern witchcraft, and then you have others like the battle between the life-denying forces and the life-creating forces, which a book called Night Battles was written about quite a few years ago, and he talks about Italian witches in that book and how they recalled in their visions how they went at certain times of the year and they joined strange armies of spirits that fought with each other at different times throughout the year, and they realized that they had to fight against some powers out there if they wanted to preserve their communities from disaster, to keep their crops growing, to keep the people healthy, but participating in underlying battles in the spirit world, which have something to do with how things work out in this world, is another feature of pre-modern witchcraft that we don't see a lot of today. Things like that. But I think for me, the most profound reality of pre-modern witchcraft, which you see a little bit of in modern witchcraft, but not to the extent that I think it was present historically, is the idea of making covenants. Worship, the way a lot of modern witches worship gods and goddesses, is a kind of covenant, but not quite what Isabel was doing when she covenanted with the being she called the devil in her trials. Okay, I mean these sorts of super intimate relationships where a person's soul's destiny is really super changed through a personal relationship with a powerful spirit person. These are the covenants that witches were known for. It's the source of the terrifying deal with the devil that the church is always talking about. These qualities emerge from our records of old witchcraft, and you don't get a lot of that in I guess, a lot of modern witchcraft. Modern witchcraft seems a lot more religious in the sense that it seems to be a form of reconstructed paganism, and people are worshiping gods and goddesses, and, there is some forms of occultism, some forms of magic that appear in modern witchcraft, but, it has a different character.
Yeah.
One of the things that I do want to add at the end of this is the reality of sorcery, of being able to be the sort of person who can bring about extraordinary changes in this world through the use of will or various ceremonies or what have you. The reality of sorcery is to be found in both pre-modern witchcraft and in modern witchcraft. Modern witches aren't like doing it wrong in some way. I'm not trying to say that. No, sorcery exists in both places, and I've met people. Like I just told you about my friend who was a member of the majestic Wicca tradition. I just told you she was capable of doing things that just completely boggled the mind. So sorcery is real. People, there people from every age, then and now. Some people have achieved some remarkable abilities, so that's always possible.
Yeah. Now, how much of this is? I know that you just love Isabel. We know that you're a fan, but Isabel Colty. But how much of this comes to you in dreams?
How much of what exactly?
The knowledge that you have. I mean, the things that are revealed to you. How much of it is revealed to you in dreams?
I would say a smaller portion. The trance state, the trance state that I call shimmering, is like a lucid dream. It would be very hard for a person who didn't know what they had done to get into the shimmering state. It'd be hard for them to separate that from a dream. I can because I intentionally induce the state. Sometimes it does happen spontaneously on its own, and when it happens on its own, that's always the strongest kind of experience. That's very frustrating, but that's just the way it works. It's just like a law of the unseen world. When something in the unseen pulls you out of your perceptual body state, that's going to be the strongest and most transformative kind of experience you can have, and you can't make that happen. But as far as the trances you can make happen, they are extremely similar to very vivid dreams. But as for me lying down in bed at night, going to sleep, and then having a dream, if I do dream incubation, which I do sometimes, and if I succeed, that's usually pretty profound. But in general, just uninspired by me dreams that come and show me something, I would say that was a smaller part of what I've experienced. However, at least 3 dreams from my life, at least 3, maybe 4, from the time I was 23 to now, stand out as not just dreams, but dream visions that came to me and did change the way I look at everything, or did change the way I did things in the future.
Very
So
interesting.
sometimes a dream visitation comes.
Oh yeah, no, absolutely, no. This is why I'm asking you this, because this is mentioned over and over again. Dreams, and we know, sometimes they're really quite not just a simple dream. The myth of progress and the path of initiation. This is a very interesting text that you have in your book on the ladder. Another ladder. from the devil's forest, ladies and gentlemen. And you say that the path of initiation is different from the path of the non-initiate life in that it is an accelerated route to the consummation of what it means to be human. What do you mean by this?
I mean that I suppose if you believe that there is a goal for our humanity, and I hate to use the word goal because I don't want to reduce life to
A
some
goal,
kind of
yeah,
right.
series
I
of
don't want
goals.
to reduce life to a game. I don't want people to think of life as did he achieve the goal or didn't he? Life doesn't have a fundamental question that you can balance everything in life on like that. And if I were to believe that, I would sound a lot like Christians who believe that the question of life comes down to whether or not you've accepted Jesus.
Yes.
You know,
Yes.
so did he
Yeah.
win or did he lose? Did he have Jesus or didn't he? Did he achieve the goal or didn't he?
Yeah.
You know, I can't. That's just that binary thinking. You know, just drives me nuts. This overly, painfully dualistic, you know, kind of nonsense. Well, if life has a goal or a point, it's so very immense, broad, and deep that it encompasses everyone and everything. So I'm not going to try to split hairs or invent some system to measure things by. But initiation, in the classical sense, in the older sense, is like a new beginning. Okay, and when we are born into our modern world, it is an initiation, the start of a life, the initiation of a human life, and immediately we are bombarded by the prejudices and troubles and confusions and dangers of our world. And our modern world is about 10,000 problems all holding hands. I mean, everyone knows it. I don't need to convince anyone of this. There's a lot of bad elements out there and a lot of problems. And from the time you're a baby all the way up to your adulthood, you're bombarded by these terrible things, and it creates closed off people. It creates people that are afraid. It creates people that are very unable to engage this world in the amazing way that this world can be engaged. And initiation, like into ancient mystery religions, opened people up. It brought them out of that shell that the modern mainstream of society hammers people into. So I think that actually, originally, before the super troubled modern shell of a society that we have became the monolithic thing it is, I do think that people, a very, very long time ago, naturally just got more out of life than we do because they lived differently, they thought about things differently, they experienced things differently. And the initiation that I'm talking about is a return in a way to that state where a person is less afraid and more open. And that's what I mean by the fulfillment of your human person.
Yes.
A human is capable of a lot more than what we naturally tend to do these days.
The robin has hollow bones. I don't know if you do. Well, we all do. Have a little bit of hollow bones. Simplicity in the path, and we talked about simplicity. In the beginning, you were saying that one of the things that really is very important to me is simplicity. You said that August Robin said that the more simple we are, the more complete we become. And I had a teacher who said to me, simplicity is the essence of the path. Why is this so overlooked, right? Because, it seems to me that people are trying to fluff, not in terms of fluff, yes. Who am I kidding? To try to fluff things and put, sometimes layers that shouldn't be there. It should be a little bit more dissected and more raw. What do you think about this?
I think that when we enter into the industrial world and we enter into a world where science becomes the physical sciences and technology becomes such an important part of our lives, I think that there is how do I put it? There's just this underlying belief that no one questions, that if it's true, that it takes a really, really, really smart guy to figure it out. If it's going to be really useful, it's got to be complex. I mean, my computer is a very complex machine, extremely complex, okay? But, computers are such an important part of everything in our lives these days,
Yeah.
And so there is a mechanistic, technological, scientific paradigm, that sort of tells us that complexity is in fact a good thing, because it took some brilliant people doing a lot of lab work to figure this out, to figure that out, to put satellites in space. And then, before the modern industrial world, the Christian church was born, and you had men like Thomas Aquinas and Augustine who wrote, and Thomas especially, wrote these enormous libraries of densely complex theological treatises. Thomas is called the doctor of the church because, his Thomistic philosophy was considered by the Catholic Church to be the pinnacle of all Christian philosophy. Mm-hmm. But it's, I went to Loyola. I studied Thomism and Thomas Aquinas, and it's really complex and dense stuff. Very, he was a big fan of Aristotle, and he tries to really sound like Aristotle, very Aristotelian in his thinking. And this is theology, the divine science. The great truth that the Christian church brought to the world, it wasn't just a simple, hey, love your neighbor and you go to heaven forever. In reality, priests were highly educated men who read these really deep theological texts, and there was a complexity to the truth, huge complexity. It took very learned men and wise men to discover it, and to teach it, to learn it, you had to be a special person and go to school for years and years. These things are deeply buried inside of us. We have this suspicion of things that are too simple or too easy. If it's too simple or if it's too easy, chances are it's too good to be true. And then, the Protestant work ethic comes in and says, if you're not up, busting your bum from, sun up to sundown, you're not going to get anything that's worthwhile. If it's worthwhile, you're going to work a ton for it, and you're going to invest so much of yourself into it. It's going to be huge, a big project. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. There's no room for us to appreciate simplicity when we have a world full of things like that. So I think that people really believe on some level that some profound spiritual teaching has to be really kind of complicated or complex or deep on some level if it's going to be true. I don't know how to say that, but I mean, that just strikes me as the attitude people have. Yeah. You might tell someone some deeply spiritual statement that's just full of meaning, but it's very simple, and a lot of people be like, no, man, it can't be that simple. I mean, when I achieve my great spiritual enlightenment, there's going to be fireworks, and I'm going to be lifted above this world, and I'm going to rise through the plains, and there's going to be singing angels, and there's going to be, this magical thing happening and that magical thing, and all of these symbols will be there somehow. Their vision of human enlightenment or of the goal is extremely tied up with this, It was an enormous effort, and I overcame all these problems and solved these puzzles, and so that's why I think we can't...
People are trying to be blown away, aren't they? Because, there's so many things. And they don't really let themselves be blown away by simplicity, I think. Sometimes when you say things that are very, very quite simple, and they're really profound truths, you know what I mean? And it's the most simple thing. It just goes over their head.
Well, they're afraid to believe that anything could be so easy.
Yeah.
What's funny is there's a distinction to be made between easy and simple.
Oh, yeah. Yeah.
You know what? It may be very, very simple to meditate. Most meditative procedures that are very serious are pretty simple procedures, but they are not easy.
No.
It is not easy to really make yourself into the simple sort of, to create in your mind the simple sort of consciousness you need to engage simple meditation. It's not easy because there's so much mind noise running around in us. There's so much going on in there, that it's hard to quiet our minds. It's not easy. Even if the technique is simple, simplicity doesn't necessarily mean ease.
Mm-mm. Now, I'm calling a little bit now here, and you talk a little bit about this in this most ancient madness, the trapped beast and the blood sacrifice. You talk about, and I'm calling a little bit your expertise on this. And I often ponder about this because I see them all. How much of mental illness we have in in magical paths. I mean, it's there are certain degrees. We all are crazy. We all have a little bit of madness. I mean, if we wouldn't, why would we do what we do? I mean, we have to. But there's a lot of. I'm talking about profound mental illness here. I'm not talking about just our little madness. do you see this? I mean, do you see this around you in where you know, in your work and sometimes with people that you really work with and come to you? There's a lot of delusion and a lot of mental illness. What do you think that this is the cause? What is the cause of this? I mean, is it, you know, maybe magical work not really resolved, bad training, bad practice? What is this?
Well, when we look at when we think about the occult in general, you know, the word itself means hidden, and occult is occult practices for a very, very long time have been outside of the mainstream. And you know, to go outside of the mainstream, to have the desire to go, to have the ability to go out there and to deal with what's out there, that's not something that just anybody does. A person can't be completely invested in the mainstream, the mainstream cognitive structure of society or mainstream assumptions about a society, and they can't be that invested in those things and walk on the occult side, I suppose. You know, in my work, as a psychotherapist, one of the first things they teach you in school is that it's not so much that, you know, we have a lot of crazy people, it's that we have maladaptions. Society works a certain way and expects certain things. The extent to which you and I are able to engage society right back and perform the way it wants us to perform is the extent to which we're going to be crazy or not crazy. So, you know, really, the clinical types of distress that lead us to give the label mentally ill to someone really all resolve down to how that person can or cannot engage their everyday life, their everyday relationships, their work life, their lives as parents or their lives as partners or whatever. The extent to which they can engage or can't engage those things successfully. You know, mental illness is known when a person loses all their interpersonal relationships or fails at being a parent so badly their kids have to be taken away, or they can't hold a job and they end up homeless. You know, they can't engage. And that's, you know, that's how mental illness is known. That's like clinical, that's the distress that it causes. Okay, if a person can be a parent or keep a job and keep a roof over their heads, and if they can walk down the street without harming anybody and just go to the store and buy their groceries and go home, if they can do these things, it doesn't really matter beyond that. What they believe or what's going on in their heads. You're going to have a really hard time finding someone who will call them mentally ill in the clinical sense. If a person is so badly depressed that they can't keep those things up, keep their life up, well, then we have mental illness, you know.
Yeah.
So when it comes to the occult, I mean, it's really hard to say because everyone is so different. But I think that
you said different. Everyone is so different.
Okay, well, everyone is. I mean, each person that's going to come to me, I'll admit it. I'll admit it. I've talked to, I can't count how many people I've spoken with since I went online and started engaging the world as Robin Artisson. I had an enormous amount of people speak to me on the phone and email, in person, you know, and a few of those people were clearly, in my opinion, highly distressed people, you know, I guess mentally ill would be an appropriate label. You know, not bad people, not necessarily harmful people at all, but, I mean, these people were they were kind of a mess, you know.
Yes.
And I say that very lightly. I'm the guy that thinks that, you know, rocks on the ground somehow have persons like me indwelling them, and I'm trying to be polite to rocks and trees.
Yes.
Try to understand. I can't really. I don't have much, you know, room to call other people too crazy. You know, I mean, I'm making big life decisions based on things I dream.
Yeah.
Okay, so I mean, you know, a lot of people out there would think that was nuts. But I think that the occult world is going to attract people who, for some reason, are just not that adaptive to the modern non-occult world. And I mean, honestly, could you blame them? I guess I must be one of them, so I can only see that one perspective. But what does our mainstream ordinary world really have to offer us beyond pick a job, pick a career, make as much money as you can, good luck on getting medical insurance, and then death? I mean, in the middle of that, you might actually find a relationship that means something to you. You might have kids, as long as you can get that relationship and those kids to fit in, you know, to the hours your employer gives you. Yeah. But I mean, you know, it's a pretty dismal world.
It is.
And I think that the occult world, or the world of the unseen, or the world of the supernatural, obviously, to a lot of people, it means that there's something more to life, that there is something more amazing going on, and that's going to attract a lot of people, especially people who already have a hard time fitting in.
Oh yeah, yeah. No, I'm just saying because there's a lot, and it's the fascination also. If there are people, and I've seen this. I mean, and you said there's troubled people or people that I was just asking you this because I didn't know if you were of the opinion also that sometimes bad practice on the magic. Or on all of these things that related to the occult, either being it doesn't matter if it is ceremonial magic or whatever it is. Sometimes people are not right guided on these things, and there are repercussions to this. It's not that people say, oh, this is very dangerous, and said, yeah, let me just like light the candle, just shut up. But it really does. It has a lot of it's dangerous. It really is dangerous, and people don't really realize that often. You see,
I have to agree, but I have to make one little kind of caveat to that. I agree, yes, that in the unseen world there are spirit persons, there are non-human persons who are predatory, who can be dangerous, who are malevolent, who can hurt people. Now, they can hurt people who practice some kind of occult path, and they can practice people who are just trying to go to work and live their lives. They can affect lots of different kinds of people. It's always possible, just like in the human world, that you'll encounter a being that doesn't have your best interest in mind or is just dangerous. That is always possible. I don't know that it's as common as a lot of people are, fearful people think, but it is possible. I have to say that. However, I have met people in occult paths who have clearly gotten into some bad mojo, and I've seen people I've seen people for whom an occult type practice, a sorcerous or magical practice, was not good for them. It was turning them into not just a bad person, but something even more menacing than that. Yes. However, I can't help but think that a Wall Street dude who makes millions and millions of dollars really doing nothing and holding up a system that exploits a lot of people all over the world, I think he's kind of into bad magic too, whether or not he realizes it.
Yes. Yeah, that's true. That is true. Ladies and gentlemen, Robin Artisson, the author of Letters from the Devil's Forest. I could be here for hours with you.
It's always a pleasure.
It's really. I mean, I would be here forever. We didn't have any questions from people. There's a couple of people here on the chat room, but they don't have questions. So I'm just going to very quickly. We have 11 minutes, so can you make it 5? Transferring, transfers, and the crossroads sigil. What is transferring, or transference?
Transference. It is the moving of something from one place to another, and in the sense of sorcerous transference, it is moving something in this world into the unseen world. Okay. In that chapter, I talk about that crossroads sigil is, as crossroads sigils tend to be in a lot of occult systems, it's a symbol of a place where this world touches the unseen world. So it's an interface point. So the crossroads sigil is, when it's drawn in this world, is a tangible location that a person can focus on, which, in their mind, and to their soul more importantly, represents the reality of interaction between this world and the next.
This is it's just a very beautiful concept that you just wrote about it on your book. I have it's exactly this. I would say that the essence of it's the same as I understood it in my own workings, but it's we call it a different thing. But it has the same kind of. It's a transference, and of course, from this world to the other. Thank you so much, Robin, for being here. This is such a wonderful. It was a wonderful 2 shows about you and about all you do. Now, you had a couple of things going on. You will do a second unsealing the Great Below, aren't you? You're going to do a second
Yes.
one.
Yes.
It's yes, November 14 to 16 of 2014. What this year, November, next November, 14 to the 16. Are you receiving already? You are. Of course, you are.
Well, Caroline
Not
and
yet.
I are,
Oh.
we're a little worried about that particular seminar because we think November might not be the best time for seminars because of the presence of holidays and the changing of the weather and things like that.
Mm-hmm.
Oh, we definitely have had a handful of people who are on board for it, but we need about 3 or 4 more before we can go forward with the whole thing. And we're thinking that maybe, either the location or the time might be affecting people, but we sincerely hope that before October is over, we will have found the other 3 or 4 people we need.
Get to the page, people. www.robinartisson.com/events and go to the page and fill that form. And also, you will have a couple of other things coming up, a couple of books, right?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
And let me see here. Okay, so you will have the primordial sacrament, which is it's really interesting. This book would be, very, very interesting. The hidden, how do you say this? Conventicle. Conventicle, yeah. And the Master's Book of Curious Tales, and that's another one that's really, really coming soon. We are just really very excited. I think that I can speak for everyone about this. All of these works. Extinction level event, which is something very interesting. Can you talk a little bit about that?
I will, but before I do, let me say that
Go ahead.
That recent treatise that I just published online for free, the Spirit World Gallery.
Oh yes.
I really enjoyed writing that, and I enjoyed making the little web page for it. And this is the first time I've ever had a website where I can just make PDFs and make them, able for anyone to come and download.
Yes.
So what I'm going to do is I'm going to get my story, my fiction story, Meadowsweet's Red Chaplet, plus the prequels I've written for it, and I'm going to make them into PDFs, and I'm going to make a page at my website for people that want that, because a lot of people have said that they miss those stories being around.
Oh, that's good. Yeah.
Now, Extinction Level Event is a body of fiction work that me and Caroline and my friend Chris Cotton are doing. It's a post-apocalyptic fiction setting, and it's really just about, adventures in the human world after the collapse of our civilization. So it's sort of a vanity fiction product. Sort of a project for us.
Yeah.
And we're enjoying it a lot, but it's sort of it's really secondary to what Black Malkin Press is really focused on right now, which is getting these books that you were just talking about, the Hidden Conventicle and the Primordial Sacrament. Those are definitely coming next, and a lot of work is being done on them.
Oh yeah.
It's a very exciting time for us.
Very good, very good. Thank you so much. This was an incredible conversation, as always. Thank you so much for being on the Blackchair.
Thank you.
And I will hope to have you soon on the show again with at least, 1, 2, 3, maybe 3 more times with all of these books. We'll see how we can do about that. And we'll waiting for your PDFs also. That's great. Thank you so much for being on the Blackchair.
Thank you again.
Well, that's basically it on the Blackchair. I'll see you next on the next show. Until then, have a wonderful, wonderful week.